title my talk here as the Chinese curse. All of you may know or have heard the Chinese curse, which is may you live in interesting times. I researched the Chinese curse, and it turns out that it's not Chinese at all. It turns out that it was penned by an Englishman in 1936, and yes, he was prescient because the World War II followed. But I want to give you the closest in Confucian and Chinese languages. I'll give you the closest rendering of what we call the Chinese curse, which is better to be a dog in peacetime than to be a man or a woman in a chaotic period. So you may have be wondering what your why I'm starting out this way. But I did want to give you something that maybe you had not known before, and now I'll move on into the presentation. I want to frame this in a very big picture and make some predictions for our profession. I strongly believe that history will view the last 10 years as a vast transitional time when how we communicate and how we buy things have been transformed. And Amazon.com, mobile being the way we communicate, Amazon, an example of the way we buy things, have changed everything, and almost everybody is participating. All you have to do is go to Starbucks and watch 15-year-olds on their phones and 80-year-olds on their phones, and if you were to watch their screens, they would be doing one of these two activities. These affect our work significantly now, and I would offer in the following ways. Direct mail is in rapid decline. Telephone connections are even more difficult and selective. Annual giving especially is in transition from 20th century techniques to 21st century realities. Organizations are slow to adapt, and potential donors have largely changed their lives, creating a gap. And I believe that that's where our profession is between eras now. So it's adapt, and innovate, or lose ground. My predictions are as follows. I would place these within a time frame of 5 years. One is the near extinction of printed materials as it relates to fundraising cases and fundraising materials. Second, Google and Facebook-like individual inserts about your organization will be individually delivered and personalized on everybody's mobile device. Some of that is already happening, and I believe that that's where all of us will move. There will be the near extinction of snail mail and the near extinction of PCs, except for business, and the explosion of data analysis, and analytically driven strategy. So I wanted to give that framework. Laurie, if you would advance the slide, please. We're on to the Giving USA data, and what my talk is about is what happened over the last year or two, and John will talk about what's going to happen over the next 2 years. So we'll sort of have a 4-year run at this. If American philanthropy were a country, I looked this up along with the Chinese curse, it would rank 30th in GDP, and it would be just behind Austria, and it would be above South Africa and Hong Kong. In other words, these are huge numbers. Giving in 2014 is up a whopping 7%. That's 250 percentage points greater Then the growth rate of the American economy. Pretty interesting that philanthropy is outpacing our economy. When we combine individuals and bequests and of giving, mirroring the 70% of the American economy that is driven by personal consumption. The foundation sector continues to grow, doubling since 1990, especially in up stock market cycles. Foundations redirect individual giving and perpetuate donors' preferences. Lori, if you could change. This display here shows the three areas actually that really spurred the growth of 2014 from 2013. Foundation giving continues to just rocket up, again, performing at 2.5 times the level of the economy. Bequests were a huge elevator here. That figure could be evened out over several years. However, I also think it represents the culmination of 25 years of professionalism in this area, and an area that is still under-resourced. And the corporate number at 13.7%, remember that corporations are 5% of giving. What's interesting in the digging deeper on that number, found this little nugget, is that 65% of that corporate giving is non-cash. And so it would be in the form of services, it would be in the form of software, it would be in the form of things that corporations make rather than money that our organizations would spend. Next slide, please, Lori. Just a quick look at where the money went. You'll have all these slides if you don't have them already. Religion continues to move down the percentage ranks here, but what's happening, I think, since when this record keeping started in 1975, religion was well above 50%, close to 60% of philanthropy. What's happening is that those resources are moving into secular charities. So I think it's probably roughly the same amount of money that religious causes and social causes are receiving. However, it's going through different channels. Next slide, please. The total giving grows, and it remains clearly sensitive to the economic cycle. And there, again, you look at that dip. These are many of these are inflation-adjusted bars. So there has been true increases in philanthropy. However, that dip from 2009 through 2008 through 2011 was, we all know about it, we all felt it, and from the depths of the Great Recession to now, this is the first year where total giving has exceeded what happened in 2006 and 2007. It's been a long climb back, but it has. There have been good markets, and a lot of this has been recovered. Next slide, please, Lauren. These bars showing the changes over the period of time of how individual giving and foundation giving and bequests and corporations have changed. I think it's very interesting because if you look at it, the only area that has increased is that foundation area. And if you look at it from 1990 to 2014, that has virtually doubled. It's a huge increase. This is also being picked up by individuals, not only in forming family foundations, but also in engagement with donor-advised funds. Four donor-advised funds were 4 of the 10 largest recipients of philanthropy in 2014. Rather remarkable. And this is, of course, institutionalizing giving. It is making it a family affair. It is making it and more a next generation affair, so that you're going to find that there are going to be a proliferation of foundations that move into the next generation and will be operated by children and relatives and friends. Next slide, please. I think this is very interesting, and I want to use this as an object lesson. There's been a lot of complaints that the percentage of disposable personal income has pretty much remained at 2% forever, and the inability to move that. Now, of course, the sums of money are so much larger, so that 2% of the total in 1974 was much smaller than 2% of totals in 2014. But what the slide doesn't take into account is a fact that 62% of Americans give. That's a well-documented amount, which means roughly that 40% of Americans are hardcore non-donors. And if we remove the non-donors from this kind of representation, which I think is a fair thing to do, individual giving rises to 3.3% of disposable income, and that's a significant difference. And there have always been efforts to get it to 5%, but by taking out the hardcore non-donors, you end up with a recognition that this is probably going in the right direction, and that this is, by those who give, a more sizable portion of their incomes. Lori? So these are a summation of the comments I just made. Lori, if you could go through them, I will get to my. There's 2 or 3 of them there. One more. Practitioner takeaways. The way I read this information from 2014 is to double down on planned giving. I think that there is still more donor demand for planned giving than there are planned giving services. Demographics and capacity are both strong. The baby boom has entered into this period for their children and their families and for their charities. Planned giving is the large gift vehicle for the non-1%. I think that you will see that more and more. This is a long-term play. I believe that you could have, that most institutions could have many more planned giving officers. Texas A&M has only been in this business now for 6 years. They now have 6 planned giving officers, and they broke all records in that relatively short period of time. I also think that organizations need to reassess their foundation capacity. It's best now to split foundation work and corporate work. A lot of people, to use an academic view of this, a lot of people think that foundation officers need to look like faculty and corporate officers need to look like corporate employees. The proliferation of family foundations is, again, going to cause this, not only in the money that was given over the last year, but on a continuing basis. This is going to be a stronger and stronger area that probably requires more investment. Next slide, Lee. The news about 2014 is that big gifts fueled the increases, and a lot of those came from Silicon Valley and a younger set. Wall Street figures prominently in those large gifts, i.e. Paulson's gift to Harvard. And big gifts will continue to fuel this, especially now as the Gates-Buffett challenge continues to attract billionaires. And I suspect many near billionaires. I suspect that people with a net worth of 100 million or higher are looking at that and saying, yes, those are things that I should do too. So this is going to continue to be a stage rocket for philanthropy in America moving forward. My best advice to you, to remember that 40% of Americans don't give, my best advice to you is to think of your donors as the first thing that you want to know about them, and to ask them is, are they philanthropic? Do they have a philanthropic impulse? And you can ask them, and many people will be proud to tell you. And I simply say we're often attracted to highly capable people who aren't philanthropic, and it is in that answer, that first question, that is most important. And finally, the future is analytics. This business used to be 80% intuition and 20% data, and now it's 80% data and 20% intuition. And those that start using these analytical tools will continue to develop, and those that hang on or perhaps keep trying to do the way they've always done things, I think will in place or perhaps lose ground. At a recent conference, I went to the exhibitor hall, and fully 2/3 of the booths at the fundraising conference involved analytics in one way or another. Again, our organizations are slow to adapt, and our donors are not. Our donors, our board members, they expect all of us to use these analytical tools in philanthropy. And again, when you combine this with the transformation in how we communicate and how we buy things, we see a vastly different horizon going ahead, all of which are needed, which all of us need to adapt and to innovate. So I thank you for this view and the opportunity to roam across the landscape here. I ask my co-presenter John if you have any questions or reactions to this presentation.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate the perspective you've given on the Giving USA data. You and our audience will be shocked to hear that I agree with everything you said. And let me take your last point first, which is the point about analytics. Clearly, as the level of investment in fundraising operations increases, it is going to require higher degrees of accountability, and should require higher degrees of accountability. CFOs, CEOs are going to want to see the return on that investment, and they want to see good planning going in for the use of those funds. So totally agree, analytics is the future and extremely important to the future. Excuse me? And so I want to emphasize that point. Second point you made had to do with the full recovery that we've seen in the fundraising operations. Excuse me, telephone. You noted that there has been a full recovery in giving since the Great Recession. And you noted also that it's been a long climb back. And your point's well taken. And it doesn't seem like a long climb back because it's been essentially 5 years. But if you look at that chart and look at the data over time, you'll notice that most recoveries occur within 1 or 2 years after the recession. This took 5 years to occur. And that was a function of the depth of the recession. It is also, though, a reminder of the resilience of philanthropy in the United States. So I think the great news of the Giving USA report is that we have now achieved full recovery from the recession, even after accounting for inflation.
In a personally uncharacteristic negative description, the fact that very large gifts have fueled this rise means that some people have dropped out, and there is an evidence of this in the continued decline of alumni participation in education, often probably since 1988. But there are less numbers of donors giving more money, and that equation can't go on forever. John, would you like to take us out on the forecast?
Sure, and let me make one more point, if I could, however, on Giving USA before we jump into the outlook. You were talking about the fact that the share of giving going to religion has been declining, and you rightly make the point that doesn't mean less money is going to religion, but just the share. A sector that has continued to enjoy growth and faster growth than other sectors has been the education sector, which often prompts the question, what is it that education is doing or has going for it that contributes to it being, if you look at 2013 and 14 combined, it was the sector that saw the greatest growth rate. And I would point to three things about the education sector, two of which are inherent to the sector itself, and one of which I think is an object lesson for all sectors. The two things that are inherent to the sector itself are schools, colleges, and universities inherently enjoy long-term relationships. Long-term relationships with alumni, long-term relationships with parents. And we all know that long-term relationships is the name of the game in successful fundraising operations. The second inherent advantage that the education sector has is it naturally has broad appeal to the donor community. A university, for example, has a multiplicity of giving opportunities. If the donor's interest is in the arts, there's an opportunity to give to the arts. If a donor is interested in medicine, there's an opportunity to give to medicine. If a donor is interested in social justice, there are opportunities to give in the social justice arena through the university. And also the broad appeal is because universities, schools, colleges are not bounded by geography. Their appeal not only is nationwide, but increasingly what we're seeing is worldwide. But the third factor, which is the object lesson I think for all sectors, is the high degree of professionalism that the education sector has brought to the fundraising activity. Back to your point about analytics and to staffing levels, infrastructure, investment, all of that is paying big dividends for the education sector, and I would say the same could be true for any of the other sectors of the nonprofit world. So with that, let's move forward. Michael has given us a look in the rearview mirror at where we've been, and I'd like to take a look at where we're going. And we can take a look at where we're going through the Philanthropy Outlook, which is commissioned by Martz and Lundy and researched and written by the Indiana Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It's a one-of-a-kind report that offers the outlook for philanthropic giving for a 2-year period. And one of the reasons that it's such a valuable report is it is based on detailed economic analysis. So I'm pleased to share the information with you, especially because, and this is a spoiler alert, the outlook for 2015 and 2016 is quite positive. Let me delve into the specifics in a moment, but the big picture is that philanthropy is expected to deliver stable growth both this year and next. And I want to emphasize that stable but modest growth is preferable to dramatic but erratic growth, especially for planning purposes, and that's a point I'll return to at the end of my remarks. So let's take a look at the data going forward. The Philanthropy Outlook is projecting an increase in giving of 4.8% in 2015 and 4.9% in 2016. Again, my earlier point, modest but stable rates of growth. I hasten to add, these are inflation-adjusted figures, and I will use inflation-adjusted figures throughout this portion of the presentation. And to put that in context, inflation in 2015 is currently estimated at less than 1% and between 1 and 2% for 2016. Projected growth rates for philanthropy in 2015 and 16 are just a tad below the 30-year average of 5.1%, which you see there on the far left, and the 2014 rate of growth of 5.4%, which you see there in the blue, and that's the rate that Michael shared with you. It's important to remember that giving was flat in 2013, so the average annual rate of growth for the past 2 years is less than 3%. So in that context, the 4.8 and 4.9% in the next 2 years actually looks quite positive. Where's the growth going to come from? Well, let's take a look at the major sources of philanthropy. Essentially, the growth in giving will come from the same sources in roughly the same proportions that Michael showed for 2014. Giving from individuals, households, and estates will represent, as Michael said, nearly 80% of philanthropic support both this year and next. Foundation giving will account for a bit over 15%, and corporations will make up the remaining 5%. You can see some small shifts in the share each sector will provide on this chart, but all of those shifts are less than 1%. Far more important is that giving from all sources is predicted to grow. So let's drill down and consider each of the sources. The one source whose share of total giving shows a slight decline. Again, I want to emphasize it's the share that's declining. It is growing, but the share is declining. The one source where there's a decline in share is individuals and households. Projected rates of growth for individual giving are 4.4 and 4.1% in 2015 and 2016 respectively. This is actually a slight improvement over last year's rate of 4% and also above historical averages. One of the key drivers of growth in giving from individuals is household net worth. No surprise there. A bit surprising is that the other key driver is nonprofit net worth. Why would nonprofit net worth drive individual and household giving? The authors of the study suggest that this is because a healthy nonprofit sector is inherently more attractive to donors and has the resources to invest in attracting those donors. Let's look at our next source of giving, and that's foundations. Foundations will be the fastest growing source of philanthropy during the next 2 years. The report projects very healthy growth rates of 7.2% and 6.7% in 2015 and 2016, respectively. This builds on the strong growth that Michael talked about of 6.5% in 2014, well above the growth rates for total giving this year and next for all sources of giving. The above average increases in foundation giving are driven by a healthy stock market and healthy GDP. A growing economy increases the value of foundation portfolios, which in turn drives higher payouts in support of nonprofit organizations. Okay, let's look next at bequests. Bequests will post uneven rates of growth in the next 2 years. The projected growth rate in 2015, as you can see, is 2.7%, well below the rate for total giving, and a huge drop from the 13.6% rate in 2014. The growth rate then rebounds to 6.3% in 2016. So what's going on here? Obvious factors that influence estate giving are household net worth and the performance of the stock market, both of which should be driving higher rates of growth for bequests. But there's another factor at work here, and that factor is previous year estate giving. The settlement of some large estates in any given year may set a pace that is unlikely to be sustained in the subsequent year. Look at it this way. If you average out the rate of increase in bequests between last year, 2014, and this year, 2015, it still comes in above 8% per year. And last, let's take a look at corporate giving going forward. Corporate giving will increase at rates of 6% in 2015 and 4.8% in 2016. Of all the sources of philanthropic support, this can be the most volatile. Michael noted the big jump in 2014, and if we go back to 2013, you may recall from his slide, you actually saw a decline in corporate giving of 10.6%, a huge swing in a 2-year period of over 20%. There are two key factors that drive corporate giving: gross domestic product and corporate savings. Some of the volatility occurs because these factors can be inversely related. As GDP picks up, corporations invest more in their operations and therefore reduce their savings. Before I share some thoughts on the implications of all of this, the researchers at the Lilly School would sleep much better at night if I share with you a few caveats on the data. The predictions in this report are dependent on a set of variables, some of which are more stable than others. The S&P 500, for example, is an important variable for all giving sources, and it is an unstable predictor. That is, there is a fairly high likelihood it will not follow the pattern on which the projections were built. The other caveat is stuff happens. In any given year, stuff happens at the macro level and the micro level that may influence overall patterns of giving as well as giving to your particular organization. Those caveats notwithstanding, there is significant value in the information found in the Philanthropic Outlook report. For all of you, the principal value of the report is as a planning tool. Specifically, it means for this year and next, you can plan for external growth in American philanthropy. Whether you realize that growth internally will, of course, depend on factors specific to your organization. Perhaps the most important of those factors is your level of investment in your fundraising operation. What the Philanthropy Outlook suggests is that you can invest with confidence that there will be growth in all the sources of charitable giving. The sectors and organizations that benefit from that growth will most likely be those that plan for it. You also need to plan to adjust along the way. As noted a moment ago, some of the predictors are unstable, and a variety of other external and internal factors can influence giving to your organization. Therefore, your planning should allow for necessary adjustments over time. With that in mind, I would recommend that you tune in next year at this time for the 2016-17 Philanthropic Outlook to see if there have been any significant shifts from this year's predictions. You need to plan to adapt. That is, you need to take the findings in this report and adapt them to your particular organization, fundraising track record, and donor community. If foundation support is a greater than average proportion of your total donations, then you may want to plan for higher rates of growth than an organization that is more heavily dependent on corporate giving. If you'll allow me an analogy, think of this report in much the same way you think about actuarial tables, and I know all of you think frequently about actuarial tables. The average life expectancy for an American at birth is 79 years. Is that useful information for a variety of planning purposes? Absolutely. Does that guarantee you will live to be 79? Absolutely not. The information becomes even more useful when you start to break it down and adapt it to your particular circumstances. For example, if you are 65, the actuarial tables suggest you will live to be 84. That's important information in making decisions about retirement income, including Social Security and annuities, as well as decisions about estate planning. It's no guarantee that you will live until you're 84, but it does increase the likelihood that you will have sufficient income for your old age if you plan accordingly. And if you plan accordingly, based on the Philanthropy Outlook, it increases the likelihood that you will benefit from the projected growth in giving. That growth is going to benefit some nonprofits. Why not yours? Finally, these predictions mean you need to plan to engage. As Michael notes, with roughly 80% of the money coming from households and estates, the need to engage with prospective donors is paramount. You all know philanthropic investment follows personal engagement. Having good data is extremely important for planning purposes. Building strong relationships is extremely important for delivering on those plans. So Michael, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, John. You know, the migration of giving from individuals and families to foundations over the past 25 years is pretty astonishing as it represents a doubling. And I'm wondering if you have any sense as to how that perhaps relates to what organizations should do in the face of that migration.
Well, you know, where this comes out into play, certainly for educational institutions, and it's a question that I dealt with frequently when I was president of CASE, is, you know, we've seen an ongoing year after year decline in alumni participation rates. And part of that decline is a function of people shifting their giving patterns to giving through donor-advised funds and through foundations. And I think by recognizing that, it does help, I think, for planning purposes, reinforce the point that it still is a relationship business, even though significant portions of money are coming through foundations. It's still the people with whom you connect at those foundations who are going to be making the decisions.
Any view from where you sit about the communications and buying transformation and how people will be asked for and make gifts into the future?
Your point about Amazon, I think, is extremely well taken. If we think back, and you don't really have to think that far back to when the social media revolution took off, when certainly online shopping took off. And if you look at online shopping, there was initially skepticism about the level to which people would adopt it as a form of shopping. There's no question now that people have adopted it with great enthusiasm. I would suggest, and I think this is what you were predicting, we'll see the same trajectory for people choosing to make their gifts online and through social media outlets. So I would say for folks who are not in the game yet, get in the game in terms of using online resources and using social media and using them increasingly, not just for donor acquisition, which they're wonderful for, but increasingly I think they will be an important source of dollar acquisition. Rates of giving through online media in recent years have been increasing at double digits.
Anecdotally, a Washington, D.C. based social services organization raised its $650,000 of annual support all through texts. So again, you'd have to be pretty take a lot of risk in deciding that that's how you had to communicate and work with your constituents. And of course, in the mobile arena, as we know about our own lack of patience and the lack of patience of others, if one can't make that gift in 3 or 4 clicks, that gift may be gone. It's all very interesting.
Yes.
Large gifts are coming through that medium now as well.
And let me pick up on that point and really to talk just briefly about the role of major donors, because you made this point in your presentation as well. Major donors do play, will continue to play an outsized role, especially in fundraising campaigns. These days in a university campaign, 1% of donors will account for roughly 80% of total giving. And the larger the campaign, the higher that percentage. In fact, it's in excess of 80% for billion-dollar-plus campaigns. The challenge for all organizations is that while you need to focus on that 1% to achieve your short-term fundraising goals, you need to focus on the other 99% to ensure the long-term sustainability of your organization, because within that 99% will be the next generation's 1%.
Thank you, John. Lori, are you able to receive and put forward some questions from our very patient and long-staying audience?
I am. So Cindy would like you to address maybe how smaller organizations can benefit from analytics. You know, where is a good starting point for smaller nonprofits in the analytics realm?
I'll take that first, Michael, and then be very interested in your perspective. One of the key things that I think, if you're a small organization to start with, is make sure you have good data about your own performance. The longitudinal data that you have for your organization is going to be every bit as important to your planning as looking at what's going on nationally and externally to your organization. So in order to apply these rates of growth to your organization, you need to know where you are currently and what kinds of rates of growth you've been enjoying in recent years and whether you're tracking appropriately with growth to giving of similar kinds of organizations. But I'd start with making sure I have very good data about the performance of fundraising for my own organization over a period of years and begin to look at what those patterns tell me.
And that's the ability to coax out the data that is within your own database. It's embedded in there, and you can get help on that, but figuring out how to ask for that data, to do those queries, is paramount. Also, a couple of other things to add to that. What we call screening data and prospect rating used to be a luxury, and it is now, I think, a commodity. It is less and less expensive and more important. Flying blind without those kinds of ratings is very difficult. At Martz & Mundy, we've designed a program for emerging nonprofits. We call it Quick Start because Kickstart's been taken, and Quick Start turns the conventional wisdom on its ear. And the conventional wisdom from the inception of this profession was that you had to develop an annual fund, and the annual fund then you'd run it for 5 or 6 years, and you keep finding prospects, and all of a sudden then you could take your annual fund and run a major gifts campaign or even a capital campaign. With the availability of data now, we can figure out who those prospects are without running an annual fund. In fact, the grateful patient programs in so many of the hospitals and medical centers do that routinely. They will take their Friday weekly admissions and discharges, and they will run them through a rating system, and they will know at that moment what their giving capacity is and how they enjoyed their stay in the hospital. So the whole notion that you have to build slowly and then earn the right to do major gifts may actually be reversed. That it may be better to think about starting with major gifts and 100 or 150 of your best prospects and becoming profitable in a manner that allows you then to build out the rest of your fundraising program. We've conducted this now in 4 or 5 different organizations. Each one of them has been different, but each one of them have benefited from this approach.
Michael, that prompts another thought, which is, given that it's a positive fundraising climate projected for the next couple of years, I think this is a good time, and I would encourage organizations, large and small, to do some experimentation. We tend to be risk averse. We tend to only do things the way we've done them in the past. And I think in a positive fundraising climate, it's a great time to test out different ways of approaching your donor base, testing out social media and testing out different kinds of messages by segmenting your audiences. So I would strongly encourage the folks listening to think about the opportunities to take a particular fundraising approach that you've used for years, take the audience that receives that fundraising approach, slice it into three groups, and with one use your traditional approach, and with the other two try some innovative approaches and begin to see what things are going to click with people going forward.
Lori?
That's a great segue actually into a question that several people are posing in slightly different ways. But you both mentioned, and John put it very well, stuff happens. And when we're looking ahead, that's important to keep in mind. And so are there things that are potentially on the horizon that you think could positively or negatively affect growth, maybe on the political horizon, also just situations, international situations?
Well, I'll take the political piece. It's a little hard to see the political horizon because there are too many candidates standing in the way. But I would say the major political factor that could influence giving is a change in the tax code. Most notably changes in the charitable tax deduction, the estate tax, and certainly such things as the IRA rollover. And as I'm sure you all know, there have been lots of proposals put forward to make changes, particularly in the charitable tax deduction, on both sides of the aisle. So I would say those changes could be a major factor going forward. There's good research actually out of the Lilly School that demonstrates that changes in tax treatment do affect patterns of giving. However, all that said, I think changes in the tax deduction and estate tax would occur only as part of an overall effort at major tax reform. And I just don't see that happening, certainly in the next 2 years. And even after the presidential election, whether we end up with President Sanders or President Trump, I don't think major tax reform is going to be on the immediate horizon. So with regard to the political horizon, I don't think we're going to see any significant disruption at least based on tax reform in the next 2 years.
You know, both John and I had subtitles for our presentations. Mine was The Chinese Curse, which is May You Live in Interesting Times, and John's was Stuff Happens. And I will point out that those two phrases are different ways of saying the exact same thing. We didn't plan it that way, but it's a lot of fun to connect those dots. Also, over the next 2 years, periods of political campaigning and presidential campaigns tend to be stable. They tend to sort of just keep on the in the way that things have been going on, and possibly the significant change occurs after the election. I actually think that this transformation of communications is one of those X factors, and the adaptation of that and figuring it out. And I think what happened during the Great Recession is instructive if we were worried that something bad or untoward was to happen, and that was those organizations that were nimble enough to change from asking for support of their organization to asking for support of the people of their organization did the best. They shifted from unrestricted, they shifted from general support, and they put up pictures of students and patients and services recipients and made it all about the people. So those that were able, again, to adapt one of John's words, one of my words, their message, and turn it into a people-oriented message did a lot better.
Michael, on that point, I recently read a book called Give and Take. It's by Adam Grant. He's a professor of economics at the Wharton School. And I highly recommend the book to our audience. Really fascinating look at the world through the lens of identifying people who are inherently takers, inherently givers, or inherently what he calls brokers, those who go into working relationships with a kind of quid pro quo mentality. Takers go into the relationship looking for what they can get out of it, and givers what they can put into it. But what prompted it was he did some very, very interesting research, or he reported on some very interesting research about the fact that if you put a face on it, it greatly enhances the performance of particularly givers in an environment. And the experiment that they did was with student phone-a-thoners. Interestingly enough, the givers initially were not performing as well as the takers in a phone-a-thon setting, and it was because the takers were there to make the money from being a student phone-a-thoner. The givers didn't quite have the motivation. They then, with a control group, brought in a student scholarship recipient and had that student scholarship recipient speak to the phone-a-thon workers. After that session, the performance of the givers went through the roof, greatly outpaced the givers, or the takers and the brokers. So to your point about it's still about the people, it's about putting a face on it, extremely important.
Lori?
Yes. So finally, maybe not finally, but I suspect this might be our last question that we'll be able to get to. I just want to make a quick note to folks that if you've asked a question that we haven't gotten to, we will certainly get answers to you once the web seminar is over. But can you talk a bit about big campaigns, you know, the billion-dollar campaigns in the context of what we know from Giving USA and what the Philanthropy Outlook is telling us?
Yeah, this is, I'll jump in on this one. The question often comes up, are billion-dollar fundraising campaigns a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is yes. They are a good thing because they are a natural extension of the remarkable tradition of philanthropy in this country. If there were no billion-dollar campaigns, it would actually signal a flagging of that tradition. We should worry if there were no billion-dollar campaigns. They're a bad thing only to the extent that the dollar figure rather than the impact becomes the story. And this builds on the earlier discussion about it's about the people, it's about what the money is going to make happen. And there can be negative political effects with state legislatures, with certainly the federal government, and negative donor reactions when we as a sector focus on the next biggest campaign and on the number of zeros in the campaign goal, as opposed to the impact that that campaign is going to have, as opposed to the leverage that that campaign will create to perform a social good. So I think billion-dollar fundraising campaigns are simply a natural outgrowth of the very trends that we have been discussing in Giving USA and in the Philanthropy Outlook, that if you drew those trend lines forward, it should be expected that we would have billion-dollar campaigns. But it should be not about my campaign is bigger than your campaign. It should be about the impact I'm going to have with the dollars that I raise through that campaign.
To emphasize that, the biggest change in the case statements of the largest campaigns is that they are not institutionally focused. They are societally focused, and they often speak of what the institution will do for the state or the nation or the world, rather than focusing on the institution itself. Final words, Lori?
Well, some of the questions that are come in are some detailed questions about giving sources and such from Giving USA. So I will compile those and send those to you, and then send those answers out to everyone, because I suspect that some of it might require you doing a little digging into the numbers. So I think on that, we should thank everyone for joining us today, and we will be sending, as I mentioned, a link to the recording to all of you, very likely early next week, but perhaps the end of this week. And we will send copies of the slide presentation. We just need to get it into PDF form, and I can send it out to everyone. And Michael and John, thank you so much. Terrific program.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you all.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.